Captain Thomas Blackwood gripped the wooden rail of his ship, the Sea Serpent, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The year was 1715, and the Caribbean waters had been his home for more than a decade. His weathered hands, marked by countless battles and rope burns, adjusted his worn tricorn hat as salty spray caught his face. The crew worked efficiently around him, securing loose barrels and checking the rigging. These men had sailed together through Spanish raids and British naval pursuits. They trusted their captain's judgment, and he had earned that trust through fair treatment and successful plundering of merchant vessels. "Captain," called his first mate. Rodriguez, a former Spanish sailor who had joined their crew after his merchant ship was captured 3 years prior. "Storm looks to be moving fast from the east." Thomas nodded, scanning the darkening sky. The Caribbean was known for its sudden weather changes, and experienced sailors learned to read the signs. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the first drops of rain began to fall. As the storm intensified, the crew rushed to lower the mainsail. The ship rocked violently as waves crashed against its hull. Thomas had weathered many such storms, but each one demanded respect and careful navigation. Through the howling wind and driving rain, Thomas heard something unusual. Above the chaos of the storm, a desperate squawking reached his ears. He looked toward the choppy waters and spotted a flash of brilliant colors struggling against the waves. "There!" he shouted to Rodriguez, pointing toward the water. "Something's drowning out there." Rodriguez squinted through the rain. "Looks like a bird, Captain. A parrot, by the colors." Without hesitation, Thomas grabbed a rope and secured it around his waist. Pirates were often seen as heartless men, but many had softer sides that they rarely showed. Thomas had always felt a kinship with creatures that fought for survival against impossible odds. "Lower me down," he commanded 2 of his strongest crew members. The men exchanged glances but obeyed without question. They had seen their captain make impulsive decisions before, and most had turned out well for the crew. As Thomas was lowered toward the churning water, the frightened parrot continued to struggle. Its emerald green feathers were soaked, and its small wings beat frantically against the waves. The bird's bright yellow head bobbed as it tried to stay afloat. Thomas reached out carefully, knowing that frightened animals could bite. "Easy there, little fellow," he called out, though his words were nearly lost in the wind. The exhausted parrot seemed to sense help had arrived. It allowed Thomas to scoop it up gently, tucking it against his chest to protect it from the worst of the rain. "Pull us up," Thomas shouted to his crew. Back on deck, Thomas examined the rescued bird. It was a magnificent specimen, with brilliant green wings, a golden yellow head, and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to study him with curiosity rather than fear. Rodriguez approached with a small piece of canvas. "For drying the bird, Captain." Thomas accepted the cloth and gently patted the parrot's feathers. The bird remained surprisingly calm, as if understanding it had been saved. "What do you think happened to it?" asked Rodriguez. Thomas looked toward the storm-tossed horizon, likely blown from land by the storm. Parrots don't usually venture far over open water. The crew gathered around their captain and his unusual rescue. Pirates were superstitious by nature, and many wondered what this meant for their voyage. "What shall we call it, Captain?" asked young William, the ship's newest crew member. Thomas studied the bird's intelligent expression. "Emerald," he decided, "for those green feathers." As if approving of the name, the parrot tilted its head and made a soft clicking sound with its beak. The storm gradually passed, leaving behind clear skies and calmer seas. Thomas fashioned a small perch from a piece of driftwood and placed it in his cabin. Emerald seemed content to rest there, preening its damp feathers. That evening, as the crew shared their meal of salt pork and hardtack, Thomas brought Emerald on deck. The bird appeared healthy and alert, showing no signs of injury from its ordeal. "Never seen a pirate captain rescue a bird before," Rodriguez commented with amusement. Thomas smiled. "First time for everything, I suppose." As night fell and the stars appeared, Thomas noticed something remarkable. Emerald seemed to be making soft calls toward the horizon, as if communicating with something in the distance. Strange behavior for a bird that was nearly drowned. Thomas mused to himself. He had no way of knowing that his simple act of kindness would soon change the course of their journey in ways he could never have imagined. The morning sun painted the Caribbean, waters in shades of gold and turquoise. As Captain Blackwood emerged from his cabin, Emerald perched contentedly on his shoulder, the parrot's feathers now fully dry and gleaming in the early light. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind perfect sailing conditions. Thomas breathed in the salt air and surveyed his domain. The Sea Serpent cut through the gentle waves with ease, her black sails catching the favourable wind. His crew moved about their morning duties with practiced efficiency, checking rigging, swabbing the deck, and preparing for whatever the day might bring. "Good morning." "Captain," Rodriguez called from the helm. "Winds holding steady from the northeast. Perfect for our course toward Port Royal." Thomas nodded, adjusting his leather baldric across his chest. Port Royal in Jamaica was their intended destination, where they planned to sell their recent plunder and resupply for their next voyage. The pirate haven was known for its taverns, merchants who asked no questions, and officials who could be bought with the right amount of gold. Emerald shifted on his shoulder, making soft clicking sounds. The bird had eaten well the previous evening, accepting pieces of hardtack and dried fruit from Thomas's own rations. It seemed remarkably intelligent, often tilting its head as if listening to conversations. "Look there, Captain," called Samuel, the ship's lookout from his position in the crow's nest. "Something strange off the starboard bow." Thomas pulled out his brass spyglass, a fine piece acquired from a Spanish merchant vessel several months earlier. Through the lens, he could see what had caught Samuel's attention. Dark shapes moved against the morning sky, growing larger as they approached. "Birds," Thomas announced to his crew. "A large flock heading our way." As the shapes drew nearer, it became clear they were parrots of various sizes and colours. Green and red macaws with impressive wingspans flew alongside smaller parrots similar to Emerald. Blue and yellow birds mixed with those sporting brilliant scarlet feathers. The crew gathered along the rail, watching in amazement as the flock circled their ship. There had to be at least 40 birds, all calling to each other in a cacophony of squawks and whistles. "Never seen anything like it," Rodriguez muttered, crossing himself. Many pirates maintained their Catholic faith despite their profession, and strange occurrences at sea often brought out their religious side. Emerald became increasingly excited, responding to the calls of the approaching birds with cries of its own. The parrot spread its wings wide and called out in what seemed like recognition. "They're following us," observed William, the young crew member. "As if they know our bird." Thomas studied the flock through his spyglass again. The birds showed no signs of moving on. Instead, they seemed to be settling into formation around the ship, some landing on the rigging while others continued to circle overhead. "Could be they recognize one of their own," suggested Rodriguez. "Parrots are known to travel in flocks." A large scarlet macaw, bigger than any of the others, landed boldly on the main mast. Its intelligent eyes surveyed the crew below before focusing on Emerald. The two birds engaged in what appeared to be conversation, with Emerald bobbing its head and the macaw responding with deep, resonant calls. More birds began landing on the ship. They perched on the rigging, the rails, and even on barrels secured to the deck. The crew watched nervously as their vessel became covered with colourful feathers and bright eyes. "Should we shoo them away, Captain?" asked Samuel, having climbed down from the crow's nest. Thomas considered the question carefully. Pirates were notoriously superstitious, and strange events at sea were often seen as omens. Some might view this as a good sign, while others could see it as a curse. "Leave them be for now," Thomas decided. "They're doing no harm." The birds seemed to understand they were welcome. Several began preening their feathers, while others called to their companions still circling above. The smaller parrots chattered among themselves, creating a constant background of tropical sounds. Rodriguez approached his captain with concern written across his weathered face. "The men are talking, Captain. Some think this is unnatural. Birds don't usually follow ships unless something's wrong." Thomas understood his first mate's worry. Maintaining crew morale was essential for any pirate captain. Superstitious sailors could become unpredictable if they believed their ship was cursed. "What do you think, old friend?" Thomas asked Rodriguez quietly. The Spanish sailor considered the question seriously. "In my homeland, we have stories of birds that bring messages. Perhaps these creatures bring news of some kind." As if responding to their conversation, the large scarlet macaw let out a series of loud calls. The other birds immediately fell silent, as if listening to their leader. After the macaw finished, the entire flock responded with their own calls, before settling into relative quiet. "Definitely seems like they're communicating," Thomas observed. "I've heard parrots are among the most intelligent birds." Young William approached cautiously. "Captain, my grandmother always said birds could sense things humans couldn't. Storms, danger, even good fortune. Thomas smiled at the boy's earnestness. And what do you think they're sensing now, William? The young sailor looked around at the peaceful scene. The sun shone brightly, the wind was favorable, and the sea stretched endlessly in all directions. Good fortune, I hope, Captain. As the morning progressed, the birds seemed to settle into a routine. Some flew ahead of the ship, scouting the waters, while others remained perched on the rigging. The crew gradually grew accustomed to their colourful passengers. Emerald remained on Thomas's shoulder, occasionally calling to the other birds. The captain found himself growing fond of the intelligent creature that had entered his life so unexpectedly. Set course for the small island ahead, Thomas commanded Rodriguez. We'll take on fresh water and see if our feathered friends wish to return to land. The island appeared on the horizon, a small patch of green surrounded by white sandy beaches. As they approached, Thomas wondered if the mysterious flock would leave them here, returning to their natural habitat. The small tropical island grew larger as the Sea Serpent approached its shores. Palm trees swayed in the gentle breeze, and white sand beaches promised fresh water and a chance to stretch sea-weary legs. Thomas expected the flock of parrots to take flight toward their natural home, but the birds showed no signs of leaving. Instead, something unexpected happened. As they neared the island, the scarlet macaw that seemed to lead the flock began making urgent, harsh calls. The other birds immediately became agitated, their peaceful chatter turning into alarmed squawks and cries. Emerald, still perched on Thomas's shoulder, joined the commotion. The small parrot's feathers ruffled as it called out in distress, its usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Something's got them spooked, Rodriguez observed, watching the birds with growing concern. Thomas raised his spyglass to study the island more carefully. At first glance, it appeared peaceful and uninhabited. Dense jungle covered most of the interior, while pristine beaches surrounded the coastline. Nothing seemed threatening or unusual. Samuel, what do you see from up there? Thomas called to his lookout. The sailor climbed higher in the rigging for a better view. Looks quiet, Captain. No signs of people or ships. But wait. Samuel paused, focusing on something. There's smoke rising from the far side of the island. Thin wisps, like from a small campfire. The birds' cries grew more intense. Several took flight, circling the ship in tight formations, while calling out warnings that the crew couldn't understand, but somehow felt in their bones. Rodriguez crossed himself again. Captain, I've sailed these waters for many years. I've never seen birds act like this near land they should call home. Thomas studied Emerald closely. The parrot was clearly trying to communicate something urgent. Its dark eyes looked directly at him, and it repeated a harsh call over and over, as if willing him to understand. All stop, Thomas commanded. Drop anchor here. The crew followed orders, bringing the ship to a halt several hundred yards from the beach. The water was crystal clear, revealing coral formations and tropical fish swimming below. Under normal circumstances, it would be an ideal place to land. Lower the boat, Thomas decided. Rodriguez, Samuel, and William will come with me. We'll investigate on foot. As the small rowing boat was prepared, the flock of parrots became even more agitated. The scarlet macaw flew down and landed directly in front of Thomas, blocking his path to the boat's edge. The large bird spread its wings wide and called out in what could only be described as protest. I think they're trying to warn us away from the island, William said quietly. Thomas had to admit the young sailor might be right. The bird's behavior was becoming impossible to ignore. Every instinct told him that these intelligent creatures were trying to communicate danger. Perhaps we should heed their warning, Captain, Rodriguez suggested. Birds have senses we don't. They might know something we can't see. As if to prove Rodriguez's point, a new sound reached their ears from across the water. Faint but unmistakable, the sound of men's voices carried on the wind. They were too distant to make out words, but the tone suggested argument or conflict. Thomas raised his spyglass again, this time focusing on the area where Samuel had spotted smoke. Through the lens, he could now make out movement among the trees. Dark figures moved between the palm trunks, and the glint of metal suggested weapons. There are men on that island, Thomas announced to his crew. Armed men, by the look of it. The crew exchanged worried glances. An uninhabited island was one thing, but encountering unknown armed men was quite another. In these waters, such men could be rival pirates, Spanish soldiers, or even worse. Could be castaways, suggested Samuel hopefully. Or could be a trap, Rodriguez countered. Pirates sometimes use small islands as bases for ambushing merchant ships. The scarlet macaw seemed to sense that the humans were finally understanding. It gave a satisfied call and flew back to the rigging, where it continued to watch the island with obvious suspicion. Thomas made his decision. "We'll not land on this island. There's wisdom in listening to those who know these waters better than we do." The crew looked relieved. None of them had been eager to investigate an island that had their feathered passengers so alarmed. "But Captain," William asked, "how did the birds know about the danger? They were warning us before we could see anything suspicious." It was a good question, and Thomas had been wondering the same thing. Parrots have excellent eyesight and hearing. They might have spotted the men long before we could see them with our spyglasses. As they prepared to sail away from the mysterious island, Thomas noticed something else. The birds that had been circling overhead began to settle back onto the ship. Their agitation decreased as the Sea Serpent moved away from the dangerous shore. "Set course northwest," Thomas commanded. "We'll find water elsewhere." Rodriguez began adjusting the sails while the crew worked to get underway. As they sailed past the island at a safe distance, Thomas kept his spyglass trained on the shoreline. His patience was rewarded when several figures emerged from the jungle onto the beach. Even at a distance, he could see they carried muskets and cutlasses. They stood watching the Sea Serpent sail by, clearly disappointed that their potential prey had not taken the bait. "You were right to warn us," Thomas said quietly to Emerald. The parrot preened its feathers with what looked like satisfaction. The crew had witnessed the exchange, and word spread quickly through the ship. The birds had saved them from walking into what was clearly an ambush. Superstitious sailors began to see the flock not as a curse, but as a blessing. "Never thought I'd be grateful to a bunch of parrots," Samuel admitted with a grin. As the mysterious island faded behind them, Thomas reflected on the strange turn their voyage had taken. First, he had rescued a drowning parrot, then dozens of birds had joined their ship, and now those same birds had potentially saved their lives. "Where to now, Captain?" Rodriguez asked. Thomas studied the horizon, considering their options. They still needed fresh water and supplies, but now he found himself trusting his unusual passengers to guide them towards safety rather than danger. 3 days had passed since the mysterious island encounter, and the Sea Serpent continued northwest through Caribbean waters that sparkled like scattered jewels under the tropical sun. The flock of parrots had remained with the ship, establishing what appeared to be a complex social order among themselves while maintaining their vigilant watch over the vessel. Thomas had grown increasingly fascinated by their behavior. During daylight hours, several birds would fly ahead of the ship, returning periodically to perch and call out to their companions. It reminded him of naval scouts reporting back to their commanders. "Captain," Rodriguez approached with the ship's water barrels in mind. "We'll need to find fresh water soon. The crew's rations are running low." Thomas nodded, aware of their practical needs. Pirates might live free on the open ocean, but they still required the basics of survival. Fresh water, food, and occasional repairs were necessities that couldn't be ignored for long. As if sensing their conversation, the scarlet macaw let out a series of calls from its perch on the main mast. Immediately, several smaller parrots took flight, circling the ship before heading in a specific direction toward a cluster of small islands visible on the horizon. Emerald, faithful companion on Thomas's shoulder, began making excited sounds and pointing with its beak toward where the other birds had flown. "They're trying to tell us something again," William observed. The young sailor had become the crew member most attuned to the birds' behavior. Thomas studied the distant islands through his spyglass. Unlike the previous island with its hidden dangers, these appeared different. Smaller and more scattered, they showed no signs of smoke or human activity. "What do you think, old friend?" Thomas asked Rodriguez. The experienced sailor considered the situation. "The birds haven't led us wrong yet. Perhaps they know of a safe place to take on water." Thomas made his decision. "Set course for those islands. We'll investigate cautiously." As the Sea Serpent changed direction, the flock of parrots became notably more active. They chattered among themselves with what sounded like approval, and several birds that had been resting took to the air, leading the way toward the distant land. The largest of the islands ahead was covered in lush vegetation, with steep cliffs rising from crystal-clear water. As they approached, Thomas could see a narrow opening between two towering rock formations that appeared to lead into the island's interior. The bird scouts returned to the ship, calling excitedly to the scarlet macaw. After what appeared to be a detailed report, the large bird let out a triumphant call that seemed to indicate approval. "There," Samuel pointed from the rigging. "That gap in the rocks. Looks like it might lead to a protected cove." Thomas studied the passage carefully. It was narrow, requiring skillful navigation, but wide enough for their ship if they proceeded carefully. The birds continued their encouraging calls, urging them forward. "Take us in slowly," Thomas commanded Rodriguez at the helm. "Post men with poles to watch for shallow water." The crew worked with practiced precision as they navigated the narrow channel. High stone walls rose on either side, creating a natural corridor that opened gradually into something remarkable. Before them lay a hidden cove, perfectly protected from ocean storms and invisible from the open sea. A freshwater stream cascaded down the far cliff face, creating a small pool of clear water before flowing into the ocean. Fruit trees lined the shore, heavy with mangoes and coconuts. "It's perfect!" Rodriguez breathed in amazement. The birds had led them to exactly what they needed: fresh water, tropical fruit, and complete protection from anyone who might wish them harm. The cove was large enough for their ship to anchor safely, with a small beach perfect for landing. As they dropped anchor, the parrots began leaving the ship in small groups, flying to the fruit trees and returning with mangoes and other tropical delicacies. They seemed to be sharing their local knowledge, showing the humans where the best resources could be found. "Lower the boats," Thomas ordered. "We'll take on water and gather fruit, postguards, but I think we're safe here." The crew began the work of refilling their water barrels from the crystal-clear stream. The water was cold and sweet, far better than the stale supplies they had been rationing. Men took turns bathing in the fresh water, washing away weeks of salt and sweat. William discovered something interesting near the waterfall. "Captain, look at this," he called out. "There are old markings carved into the rock." Thomas examined the carved symbols. They appeared to be crude representations of birds, along with what might have been a ship. The carvings were weathered, but clearly deliberate. "Someone else has been here before," Thomas observed. "Someone who also noticed the connection with birds." Rodriguez studied the markings with interest. Could be an old pirate captain left these. Maybe someone who also had birds guide him to this place. The scarlet macaw landed near the carvings and let out a series of calls. Other parrots gathered around, as if the markings held special significance for them as well. "How long do you think they've been using this place?" William wondered aloud. Thomas considered the question. The carvings suggested that the relationship between pirates and parrots in this location went back years, perhaps decades. It made him wonder about the intelligence and memory of these remarkable birds. As evening approached, the crew had completed their resupply efforts. The water barrels were full, and they had gathered enough fruit to supplement their diet for weeks. Some of the men had even managed to catch fish in the clear cove waters. "We could stay here for days," Rodriguez suggested. "Give the men a rest and make any needed repairs to the ship." Thomas was tempted. The hidden cove was paradise compared to the cramped quarters aboard ship. But he also knew that staying too long in any location could be dangerous for pirates. Their safety depended on mobility and unpredictability. One more day, Thomas decided. We'll rest, make repairs, and then continue our journey. That night, as tropical stars filled the sky above their hidden sanctuary, Thomas sat on the beach with Emerald on his shoulder. The other birds had settled into the surrounding trees, their soft calls creating a peaceful chorus. He reflected on how drastically his life had changed since rescuing the drowning parrot. What had started as a simple act of kindness had led to extraordinary adventures and discoveries. The birds had become more than passengers. They were partners in his maritime journey. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in their secret paradise, all was well. Dawn broke over the hidden cove with golden light filtering through the canopy of fruit trees. Thomas awoke on the beach where he had fallen asleep under the stars, with Emerald still perched nearby. The gentle sound of the waterfall and the soft calls of awakening parrots created a peaceful morning symphony. Thomas lifted the heavy lid, revealing contents that took his breath away. Gold coins gleamed in the tropical sunlight, mixed with silver pieces and precious gems of every description. Strings of pearls lay coiled atop stacks of Spanish currency, while ornate jewelry spoke of raids on wealthy merchant vessels. "More wealth than we've seen in years of piracy combined," Samuel whispered in awe. The crew gathered around their discovery, each man calculating his share of the enormous fortune. According to pirate tradition, the treasure would be divided among all members of the crew. with larger portions for the captain and officers. But as Thomas looked at the wealth before him, his thoughts turned to the remarkable birds that had made this discovery possible. The scarlet macaw landed nearby, tilting its head as if waiting for the humans to acknowledge their debt. "Men," Thomas announced to his crew, "we need to discuss how we share this treasure." The crew looked at him with confusion. The division of pirate treasure followed well-established traditions that every sailor understood. "Captain," Rodriguez asked uncertainly. Thomas gestured toward the birds perched in the surrounding trees. "Without our feathered friends, we never would have found this treasure. They guided us here, protected us from danger, and even provided the map that led to this discovery." The crew began to understand their captain's meaning. The parrots had been more than passengers or guides. They had been true partners in their adventure. "What are you suggesting, Captain?" William asked. Thomas smiled as Emerald flew to his shoulder. "I'm suggesting we leave a portion of this treasure here, in a place where these birds can benefit from it. They've earned their share." The crew exchanged glances, considering this unprecedented proposal. Pirates were not typically known for their generosity, but they had witnessed too much to ignore their debt to these remarkable creatures. "How would birds benefit from treasure?" Samuel asked practically. "We leave gold and silver here, along with tools and supplies that future sailors might need," Thomas explained. "This island becomes a safe haven, protected by our feathered friends, where honest sailors can find help when they need it." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "A place where the birds can guide worthy men to safety and supplies, just as they guided us." The idea grew on the crew as they discussed it. They would take enough treasure to ensure their own prosperity, but leave a significant portion to establish their island sanctuary as a permanent refuge. Over the following hours, they worked together to create a new kind of pirate legacy. Part of the treasure was reburied in a different location, along with tools, weapons, and supplies that could aid future castaways or sailors in need. They carved new markings into the stone giant, creating a message that would guide worthy men to the hidden supplies while warning away those who would exploit the birds' trust. As the sun began to set on their remarkable day, Thomas stood on the beach with Emerald on his shoulder, watching his crew load their portion of the treasure into the boats. The parrots had given them far more than gold and silver. They had shown them the value of partnership, trust, and protecting those who needed help. "This isn't the end, is it?" Thomas said quietly to Emerald. "This is just the beginning of something new." The parrot clicked its beak softly in response, as if agreeing with his assessment. As the Sea Serpent sailed away from the treasure island, the flock of parrots remained with them, having found not just temporary passengers, but permanent partners in their ongoing adventures. Thomas Blackwood was no longer just a pirate captain. He had become the guardian of a remarkable alliance between man and bird, protector of a secret network of safe havens throughout the Caribbean. The greatest treasure they had discovered was not gold or silver, but the understanding that true wealth came from the bonds formed through kindness, trust, and mutual respect. In rescuing a drowning parrot, Thomas had found something far more valuable than any buried chest. He had found his purpose,